Welcome to ESL English Practice with Traveller's Guide. English as a second language for IELTS, TOEFL, Pearson, Cambridge English or any other English language proficiency test. Remember to press the thumbs up if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below if you want to, and turn on the subtitles. In this video, we're going to be looking at IELTS Writing Task 2. The IELTS writing test consists of two parts. Task 1 is a shorter writing piece, 150 words, which should take about 20 minutes, whereas Task 2 is longer, 250 words at least, should take about 40 minutes of your time, and this is worth 67% of the total marks. So as you can see, Task 2 is much more important than Task 1 and is worth twice as many marks. The IELTS writing test is marked on the following four criteria. Task response or task achievement, which basically means did you answer the question? Did you answer every part of the question? Does your essay look like the kind of essay it's supposed to be? Coherence and cohesion. Does it flow? Does it make sense? Are your ideas put down in a logical order? Can the reader understand what you're trying to say? And does one idea lead nicely into the next one? Lexical resource, which is another way of saying vocabulary. This is where you can show the range of words that you know, use high-level vocabulary, use them correctly, and here synonyms are very important. Grammatical range and accuracy. This is about verb tenses and about sentence structure. Are the words in the correct order? Have you used the correct articles? Also, you should note that spelling and handwriting are very important, although handwriting is not so important if you're doing the online test. But with spelling and handwriting, just remember if the marker can't understand what you are writing, they can't give you an accurate mark. So I strongly recommend that you practice neat handwriting and make sure you're familiar with spellings. You should spend about 40 minutes on Task 2, and that 40 minutes should consist of around 5 minutes at the start, planning your essay. Don't just start writing straight away. Instead, make some notes on the side, write down some keywords and key ideas that you want to include. Think what you're going to have in your introduction, what you're going to have in each body paragraph, and how it's going to end, so that when you are writing, you don't miss something out. Then spend about 30 minutes actually doing the writing, forming your ideas into proper sentences and paragraphs. And the last 5 minutes you should spend editing, finding mistakes and correcting them. This can really boost your score. Your essay in Task 2 should include an introduction and a conclusion. And between those body paragraphs, I would recommend 2 or 3. Depending on the essay type and question. It is acceptable to have just one body paragraph or more than 3, but 2 or 3 tends to be about the right number. You do not need to give your essay a title. Some people think that you do, but no, that's not necessary. IELTS Writing Task 2 questions come in various different types. You might be asked to write about the advantages and disadvantages of a given situation. You might be asked if you agree, or if you disagree, or if you agree or disagree, and it might even ask you to what extent. You might be asked to give your opinions about a specific topic. You might be presented with a problem and asked to think of some solutions to that problem, or you might be asked to discuss both views of a situation. And some of the questions have a 2-part question where you're given a statement, and then there are 2 questions related to the topic but not necessarily related to each other, and you have to answer both of them in your essay. When we're thinking about the introduction, I recommend this 3-step rule. First of all, use the question for your introduction but replace the vocabulary. Here you should use synonyms to change some of the words to make it more original. Then, step 2, rearrange the sentence. Take the different clauses, move them around so that you're making the sentence more unique. And finally, add extra information. So the question itself is probably not long enough to be an introduction. add some more things. And if you are asked to give your opinion, or if you agree or disagree, you should state this clearly in your introduction. For the last 5 minutes when we're editing, you should read your own work carefully, look for spelling, punctuation and grammar mistakes, replace weak or repeated vocabulary, and make sure your handwriting is clear. So if you're using the same word too many times, think about synonyms that you can use instead. Try to upgrade your vocabulary so that your vocabulary is better, but also make sure that it's all being used correctly. So any mistakes that you can find and correct can help boost your score. The editing part can raise your score by half a point or even a whole mark, depending on how many mistakes you can correct. And also check your handwriting at this stage. If you can't read it, how can you expect the examiner to read it? It's now practice time, so let's look at an example question and see how I answered it. So here we have a previous IELTS Writing Task 2. In the box there is the topic that we'll be writing about, but before and after that we have phrases that often appear in the question. So we have, you should spend about 40 minutes on this task. We've already discussed this, but also notice the word about. So it doesn't have to be exactly 40 minutes on the task. You have to manage your own time. You have 1 hour to do both tasks. 40 minutes is the recommended amount. But as long as you have enough time to complete both tasks, you can divide that time however you want. Then write about the following topic. That's just telling you what the question is going to be. And after the question it says, give reasons for your answer and include any relevant examples from your own knowledge or experience. So this is just reminding you that in task 2 you should use examples, experience, evidence and opinions from your own life. And finally, you should write at least 250 words. At least means no fewer than. So you could write 300 words, you could write 400 words if you have enough time. That's no problem. But if you write less than 250 words, you could be in danger of affecting your score. Now let's look at the question itself. The threat of nuclear weapons maintains world peace. Nuclear power provides cheap and clean energy. The benefits of nuclear technology far outweigh the disadvantages. To what extent do you agree or disagree? You may have seen this question before. This is quite a complicated question because it has several parts to it there. At first glance it might look like it's an advantages and disadvantages question, but really it's an agree or disagree question, with the extra question of to what extent do you agree or disagree. So in our introduction we're going to make it clear if we agree or disagree, and we're going to say to what extent. Maybe you partly agree, or maybe you strongly agree, maybe you wholeheartedly agree with the statement. This should be stated clearly in the introduction and make sure that your entire essay is consistent with that view. But what are we agreeing or disagreeing with? We have the sentence, the benefits of nuclear technology far outweigh the disadvantages. So that's what we're agreeing or disagreeing with. Are the benefits better than the drawbacks? However, if we look at the first line, the threat of nuclear weapons maintains world peace. Is this a fact or an opinion? Well, usually these questions start with a fact, but I don't think this is a fact. I think that you could argue with this. The threat of nuclear weapons maintains world peace. Does it? We had world peace before we had nuclear weapons? Or you might say that we don't actually have world peace now, even though we do have nuclear weapons. So this opening statement is debatable. And the second one, nuclear power provides cheap and clean energy. Well, you could argue with that as well. The nuclear power plants are not cheap to build, and as for clean energy, they may not produce carbon emissions, but radioactive waste is certainly not clean and is very difficult to dispose of. So actually, we're kind of agreeing or disagreeing with the whole question there, rather than just if the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. Let's have a look at what I wrote for the introduction. For my introduction, I wrote, "Over the past few decades, nuclear technology has emerged as an important part of human development. However, it brings with it an interesting paradox. Although nuclear power is relatively inexpensive and doesn't contribute to air pollution, it is dangerous and creates radioactive waste, which is hard to dispose of. And while nuclear weapons may seem to deter countries from attacking others, the threat of nuclear war is always a terrifying possibility. Some people believe that the advantages of nuclear technology eclipse the drawbacks, but I completely disagree with this view." Right, so talking about my introduction, I've started here with a very general statement, introducing the idea of nuclear technology, so it's clear that that's what I'm going to be talking about. I've got this phrase, advantages of nuclear technology eclipse the drawbacks. This is very similar to the question, but I've changed the vocabulary. So in the question we had benefits outweigh disadvantages, and I've changed that to advantages eclipse drawbacks. So this is an example of stage 1 of my introduction writing advice, just changing the vocabulary. That shows that you understand what it means, but also that you can use vocabulary in the correct way. And here I have the phrase completely disagree. So I'm making my opinion very clear in the introduction and to what extent. So I've chosen agree or disagree, and I've said to what extent, completely. Now I'm going to make sure that my essay explains why I think this, and I'm not going to deviate from this view. When it comes to vocabulary, I've tried to use some high-level words, such as paradox. This is a kind of situation that is both positive and negative at the same time, something that kind of contradicts itself. We have decades. A decade means 10 years, so the past few decades means the last 30, 40, 50 years. I've got radioactive here, which is an adjective describing something that emits radiation. Eclipse is a good word. An eclipse is where the moon moves in front of the sun, so you can't see the sun. And I'm using that to show how the advantages cover up all the disadvantages so that they can't be seen. So eclipse working in that way. So the key points of the introduction: introducing the topic, restating the statement, and making my opinion very clear. Now we'll move on to the body paragraphs. Now I've chosen to write 2 body paragraphs for this essay. That seems to make sense to me. So we're going to have 1 body paragraph about nuclear energy and 1 body paragraph about nuclear weapons. For the first one, I said, "The world consumes more and more electricity every year as the global population increases and developing nations advance. The problem of supplying this energy is a headache for governments and environmentalists. Nuclear power seems like an ideal solution, as huge amounts of electricity can be generated in a short amount of time without any immediate impact on the environment. But there is a hidden danger. Nuclear power plants are vulnerable to massive catastrophes, which, although unlikely, could have a devastating effect on the surrounding area. An example of this was seen in Chernobyl, Ukraine, where a nuclear power plant exploded in the 1980s. Thousands of people were affected by radiation poisoning, and the area is still uninhabitable today. The scariest part, though, is that the disaster could easily have been much worse." So in my first body paragraph, we're talking about nuclear energy. I've touched on why some people might think it's a good idea. I've said it seems like an ideal solution. Okay, so it might appear that way. Then I use the phrase, "but there is a hidden danger." This is a nice short sentence. You don't have to use all long sentences. A nice mixture is good. And this one brings in the idea that I disagree with the idea that it could be an ideal situation. I've used this phrase, "vulnerable to massive catastrophes," which means that the power plants are at risk to something awful happening. And I've used an example from history to illustrate this point, talking about Chernobyl, which is a very famous nuclear disaster which happened in the 1980s. So this is my evidence for the danger of nuclear power and why I disagree that nuclear power is a solution. Let's look at some of the vocabulary. I've said that this problem is a headache. This means it's a difficult problem. We have environmentalists. These are people who look after the environment or who are concerned about the environment. We've got the phrase devastating effect. So it's not just a bad effect or a negative effect, devastating effect. This is a much more impactful word. And here we have the word uninhabitable. That means no one can live there. On to the second body paragraph. Many countries in the world have nuclear weapons, although they have signed a treaty assuring that they will not deploy them. These countries believe that others will not target them due to their nuclear deterrence. Perhaps this is true, but if one of these nuclear-equipped countries was invaded, would they fire their nuclear missiles, and would the invading country fire theirs in return? This kind of violence could easily and quickly escalate into a global nuclear war. It's not ludicrous to say that all life on Earth could be under threat if such war began, showing that nuclear weapons are more dangerous than any other weapon in history. Right, so in this paragraph, I've opened with a topic sentence, including nuclear weapons. So we can see that the topic of the essay has changed a little bit now. We're moving on from nuclear power to nuclear weapons. And this is a statement of fact. So I'm describing the current situation. It's a good way to begin your body paragraphs. Next, I'm talking about what these countries believe and what some people believe. However, I don't share that view, and I'm showing that with this rhetorical question: would they fire their nuclear missiles, and would the invading country fire theirs in return? So I'm using this to show the dangers of nuclear weapons. Again, if we look at some of the vocabulary here, we have treaty, which is like a governmental agreement that people have signed. Deploy, which means to fire a weapon. I'm using the word deterrence. This is something that puts someone else off or stops them from doing what they want to do. Makes them change their mind. Here we have escalate, which means something builds up and builds up. In this case, where a disagreement leads to a skirmish, leads to a fight, leads to a war. It's escalating. And the word ludicrous, which means ridiculous or silly, and I'm saying it's not ludicrous to say that, which means it is a possible situation that could occur. And now on to my conclusion. Overall, I believe that nuclear technology is inherently dangerous and should not be used by countries for either energy or weapons. Governments should invest in environmentally friendly energy sources and agree to disarm nuclear weapons. In this way, the world can be a cleaner, safer, and more peaceful place. My conclusion is just a short recap of what I've said before. I'm making sure I'm not introducing any new ideas in the conclusion. I'm just summing up what I've said already. I'm sticking with my original opinion and just restating that. The conclusion, as you can see, is not overly long. The more important information is in the body paragraphs. And if we look at the conclusion itself, I've started with the word overall. You could say in summary or in conclusion. This phrase shows that I'm writing a conclusion. Rather than saying this is now going to be a conclusion, the word overall signposts that. And I've finished with a nice little phrase that says the world can be cleaner, safer, and more peaceful. So I'm using 3 examples here. This is known as the rule of 3. It looks and sounds and reads quite well if you can put in 3 examples like this. And as you can see, this is 383 words in my essay, which is longer than it needs to be. But if you could write that much in the 40 minutes, then that's absolutely fine. Couple of things to edit in this though. We don't need to write the word conclusion, that's just for the benefit of this video, so I'd take that out. If we go back to the body paragraphs, we can see here I've used a contraction. It's. That should be changed to it is. We should not use contractions in a task 2 essay. And we'll remove this as well. And in my introduction, I have another contraction which I'm going to remove and replace with a does not. That's more formal, that looks better, more suitable for task 2. Also going to remove the title introduction. So I put that all together and this is what my essay looks like. We have the introduction with my view clearly stated, 2 body paragraphs discussing each part of it individually, and then a short conclusion restating my opinion. I can see here that I have the word dangerous in the conclusion, very close to the word dangerous in the body paragraph. So repeated words here, let's change that for a different one. Perhaps deadly. They're more deadly than, would we say more deadly? Maybe we'd say deadlier. Okay, so I'm upscaling the vocabulary, trying to make it more varied, but using it in the correct way. And this is something you could look through your essay in the last 5 minutes of editing. In an IELTS writing task, remember that the marking is subjective. So it is possible that your examiner might give you a slightly different score to someone else's. There is an appeals process if you think you've been given a falsely low score. Also, there is no right or wrong answer. Don't think that you should agree with the statement. Don't think it's better to agree with the statement. You can agree or disagree. It doesn't matter if your opinion is different from the marker's opinion. They're not judging your opinion, they're just judging your writing. The examiner will use their judgment to give your essay a score. With the reading and the listening parts, there is a right answer and they can give you a definitive score, whereas the speaking and the writing are based on the examiner's judgment. Here are some top tips for IELTS writing task 2. I recommend that you do task 2 first. It doesn't say that you must do task 1 before task 2. You can do them in either order. You have 1 hour to do both, but task 2 is worth twice as many marks. So maybe do that one first and make sure that you've got a good answer for task 2. If you run out of time to finish task 1, it's not as serious as if you run out of time to finish task 2. Start each paragraph with the topic sentence. So as we saw in my body paragraphs, if I'm now talking about nuclear weapons instead of nuclear power, I need to introduce that in the opening sentence of the new paragraph. 3. Level up your vocabulary. So go through your essay if you've used the same word more than once. Maybe change it for a different one if you can. And if you've used some very basic vocabulary, again, try to put in some more advanced words. And don't use the same word too often. Things to avoid: don't run out of time. So time management is very important here. If you feel that you only have a couple of minutes left, try to get it finished. If you wanted to put in a third body paragraph to explain something a bit more with another example, but you're running out of time, miss it out, go straight to the conclusion, because it's more important to have a conclusion than to have an extra example. Avoid phrases such as "in this essay" or "this essay agrees." This is a personal peeve of mine. We don't need to say "in this essay I'm going to talk about something," because I can see that. You don't need to tell me. I'm reading the essay. You don't need to tell me what this essay is going to have. I will find out in a moment. And don't say "this essay agrees with the statement." You're the one agreeing with the statement. Keep it personal about your opinion. The essay itself is not a living thing. It's not capable of having opinions. That's your opinion. Number 3 there, don't contradict yourself. So don't start by saying you agree with the statement and end up disagreeing with the statement. Make sure your opinions stay the same throughout. And avoid bad handwriting, which we've mentioned before. So those are my tips and my example on how to answer an IELTS writing task 2 question. I hope you found this useful. If you liked the video, please press the thumbs up. You can subscribe to the channel. There will be more videos like this. Check out my other videos on this playlist. Leave a comment below and hopefully I will see you again for another ESL practice video with Traveller's Guide. Goodbye for now.